Welcome, everyone. Today is the finale of the season three of our show, the PhD, the philosophical drama. Uh, my name is Amogh, and I'm really glad to be here hosting this finale. Now, today, what we thought we should discuss is a theme in a way connected to PhD, but not really something that we really talk about in detail, and that is philosophy. We talk about PhD, we talk about philosophy, and then we will also try and see how we talk about the real issues, the true picture of academia today. But before I go there, to talk about philosophy, I just read what Aristotle defined philosophy as, and he defined it as a theory that helps in seeking the truth. But he also mentioned that it makes people sick. Uh, when we connect this to PhD, this term PhD, the philosophy doctor, actually comes from ancient Greek language, where they term it as philosophe doctor. And I thought, what are the connections of this term philosophe to the English term that we use, philosophy? And in fact, the true thing is that the term actually connects to someone who is a lover of wisdom and not knowledge. It's a lover of wisdom. In terms of the quotient of a PhD, I was reading another article where Burks, who's a scientist, he defines a philosophy in PhD as a view of the world encompassing the questions and the mechanisms in finding the answers of those questions that inform that view. With all of this in mind, I think it's a good time to invite today's special guest for the finale. He doesn't really need a very big introduction because he's known to his students. A wonderful researcher over many years, student teacher, student friendly teacher, student love teacher, an amazing writer, a poet, music composer. And today we are very glad that he agreed to be on our show in this final episode. So I really give a grand welcome to Professor Milind Watve. Let me just add him to this call. Hello, sir.
Hello.
Thank you, first of all, for joining us here today. Uh, at the very beginning of the show, I want to ask you about something that we all are eager to know, and that is your PhD journey. When you started your journey in academia as a student.
Yes, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
perfect.
Well, my PhD was extremely enjoyable because I never wanted to do PhD. uh, I did not have an ambition of getting into research. I
Mhm.
like teaching and I joined a teaching job. So I started teaching in Garwari College in Pune
Yeah.
way back in 1979. And
Mhm.
then I continued teaching for 10 years. And my research had begun. Okay.
Mhm.
It was a different kind. I worked, I developed some products on my own. Then a company was floated based on those products. So it was sort of applied research in diagnostics. Okay.
Right.
Um, so some kind of research had started, okay, with no guidance, nothing, entirely on my own. And I was in a teaching job. Then after 10 years of teaching, I thought I was getting stagnant
Mhm.
and I wanted a change. I wanted something different. And the difference that I had in mind was to live in a forest, live in a area close to nature, stay there for a substantially long time and observe, feel, experience, and maybe come back later because you need to do a job, you need to earn, and so on. Okay,
Right.
so I just wanted a change, and then PhD gave me a possibility of a good change. Okay, so my attraction was that I would do field work for a couple of years in an excellent forest.
Mhm.
And this was the reason I joined a PhD. So getting a PhD was a sort of byproduct.
Right.
And I did not want to go into that typical line of a PhD, then postdoc, then look for faculty position,
Right.
and all. Do publications, improve your CV, apply. I never did that. Okay.
Right.
And perhaps because of this, I thoroughly enjoyed my PhD because I
Mhm.
wasn't dependent on my PhD in any way. I already had a job. I was
Right.
already teaching. Okay. So PhD was a good change and it changed me. It changed me substantially. I learned so much during my PhD. Okay. So it was an excellent experience, extremely useful experience, and
Mhm.
quite unexpectedly, it built a researcher in me. I was already in research of some kind, but it was enriched by my experience at ISC. Okay, and I ended up doing PhD in what was record time that time. Okay,
Okay.
now later on the record was broken, but I completed my thesis in 3 years and 5 months, including coursework,
Wow,
and
that's
two
great.
years of field work.
That's really a record in itself. Yes. So you mentioned you were a teacher before joining for the PhD. But after the transitioning into research as a PhD student and then coming back to teaching, what was that transition? You becoming a mentor to students because PhD you said it changed you completely. So what was that transition
Yeah,
like?
yeah. So after returning, I didn't start taking PhD students. Okay, that
Mhm.
happened quite late in life.
Right, right.
By the normal career standards, I had already quote unquote lost 10 years before getting into the PhD stream. By the way, that time the stupid age rules were not there. Okay, I
Okay,
was overaged to enter PhD, but at that time the age rule wasn't there. Okay,
okay,
it came later with CSIR fellowships and so on. Right.
right.
When I entered PhD, I was getting rupees 1200. Okay,
Okay,
my stipend was rupees 1200, but that was not bad because my first job salary was 900 rupees.
okay. So it was an increment on that level.
Yeah, yeah. So that was good, comfortable. I was married at that time. I had a very young daughter, but it
Mhm.
was fun to go with the entire family and stay in a forest. Quite
Right.
comfortable. Yeah. So when I returned, I continued with a greater insight, a greater vision, what I was already doing. Okay, that
Mhm.
was involving undergrads in the research.
Right.
So this ultimately developed into what we now call a Katta model, and the name Katta model has gone international. Okay, so
Right.
now it is referred to as Katta. A couple of times I was called for a talk from US, and I asked them, "How do you know me?" And they said, "We know Katta, and because of Katta, we know you." Okay. So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
Katta was putting undergrads together. Okay, let them ask questions, their own questions. Let them observe, let them speculate, okay, contemplate. We played with ideas, then some of it was doable at our level with a shoestring budget, with no lab, hardly any facility. But then there is always something doable at whatever context you are, whatever situation, whatever ambience you are. So we selected a few things that interested us that resulted into publications. Okay. And I started publishing with undergrads much before I started taking PhD students. Okay, so
Mhm.
just as my um, getting into PhD was delayed, my taking PhD students was also delayed. Okay.
Right.
Then in Pune University, I applied as a PhD guide, PhD supervisor, and
Mhm.
for 6 years they did not take any decision. Okay, the reason was they did not know in which department I should be recognized.
Okay.
Right, because my basic degree was in something else, my PhD was in something different, and then the publications was something entirely different. So
Okay.
they were
Right.
thoroughly confused, and they did not know whether we recognize you in microbiology or zoology or what. Ultimately, I got recognition in four different departments.
Okay.
Okay, but they took 6 years to take the decision. Okay, so until then I couldn't take a PhD student. But by that time, with undergrad students, we had published substantially.
Mhm.
Okay, the publication had started getting recognition. So there or slightly later also, some undergrad work was published in PNAS, in Journal of Theoretical Biology, American Naturalist. Okay, so we got pretty good publications that time,
Yeah.
and that became my model of doing science,
Right.
which had substantial difference from the mainstream model. Right?
Right.
And then, although I spent 10 years in ISAR, and then again decided to quit that and be back with people. Now, this time, not even a college. Okay.
Right.
Completely open to people. Then I worked with farmers, then I worked with some tribesmen,
Right.
with undergrads, with housewives, with a hospital, and so on.
Okay.
Okay. So this is a completely deviant model of doing research. I was hardly in the mainstream, although I did work in ISC earlier and then in ISAR, which are mainstream premier science institutes of India. But my model of doing science was always different than the mainstream. And there are so many advantages of it, which I recognize now when I look back. Okay, maybe it was a stroke of luck that I did something different. Maybe I didn't do it too thoughtfully. But
Okay.
today I think that much of the research outcome that ultimately came out was because I was out of the mainstream. Okay,
Okay.
and many of these publications, I bet, wouldn't have been possible if I worked with the PhD postdoc channel.
Mhm.
Okay, so it is important to recognize, it is important to realize that PhD postdoc is not the only model of doing science. There are alternatives. Okay,
Right.
the alternatives are important. And when you have these alternatives in mind, when you see the possibility of other paths, your present path actually becomes easier.
Right.
Okay, and if you are in a mindset that, oh, this is the only thing I can do now, and then if I get stuck, I get stuck. Okay,
Right.
there is just no option, there is just no alternative. That is not true.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, it is being painted everywhere that there is only one path of doing a research career, and that you do a PhD in a good place, then go for postdoc. Now, today, at least if you today you need to have two, three postdocs before you apply to some position, okay, to some faculty job or a scientist job, and that has become extremely tedious. This
Right.
becomes better, or you can handle it better if you know that there are alternatives as well.
Yeah.
Okay, you can do science with a different model.
Mhm. That's really interesting, sir. That you had a very diverse path, a diverse journey than the regular journey that typical researcher has. But at this stage, when you are mentoring some PhD students or even undergrads who are aspiring to go for a PhD, I remember my time when I had those questions, and I term them as the W questions, like uh, where do I do a PhD and why do I do a PhD and with whom
Yeah.
and when is the right time to really enroll myself in a PhD. I'm sure a lot of your students must have asked you these questions and trying to have guidance from you. What would you suggest as a rough model of what people decide after their masters or when they're at the transition period?
Yeah. So let me clarify one thing. I clearly distinguish between doing good science and doing a good career. Okay, these two are different things. Although overlapping, no doubt, but the skills required for one are different from the skills required for the other,
Right.
and some of them are actually uh, diametrically opposite.
Okay.
Okay, so doing good science and worrying to get a good career are not the same thing. And often I, whenever someone asks, I often tell them that I will talk about how to do good science. I'm not an expert in how to do a good career because that is something I couldn't do by the mainstream standards. Okay, I didn't end up being a director of something or being a chair of something or being on this committee, that committee, having huge amount of funding. I did have good funding, no doubt, but not again not through the main channels.
Right.
Um, so there is a career path, and there is science, and in fact, you need ideally you need to worry about both.
Mm-hmm.
But if there is a question of a trade-off, then I will go for science rather than I will compromise on my career if need be, but I will be more committed to science.
Right.
And the best way to do this is to get into teaching. Now, today, unfortunately, even there the condition is not so good. There are so many university positions or college positions which are vacant. Okay, the appointments are not happening regularly. They are not happening in the right way. So there are difficulties also there today. But if you can get into a comfortable teaching job, that is an excellent alternative model of doing science. Okay, so essentially, you need to ask original questions. You need to look around and pick up questions on your own. Okay, one thing that happened during my PhD is that because I was not dependent on that, I took a view that I am going to choose my PhD problem. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
nobody will give me that. And fortunately, and I was in a department, CES in ISC, the department was extremely open. Okay, so there I could say this, and they could accept what I said. Okay,
I
that
think
I
it's
will
good
choose.
because this is something that we don't really find today, that a student comes up with his or her own problem and everybody's okay with it. This is very, very rare in today's world.
Yes. So now I could do this because if that doesn't happen, I will quit.
Right.
I already have a job. I will go back to my job.
Right.
Okay. So, but that was the best thing that could happen to me, right? So right from thinking about the problem, I was on my own. Okay. And my mentor gave me all the freedom with a warning. Okay. The warning was the thing that you are trying to get into, neither you nor me know anything.
Right.
So
Right.
it is at your risk that you enter into it. But the thing is, there was no prior work, almost no prior work. So I was the pioneer. I was to set up the field. I was to do whatever came through. And as a result, we ended up publishing well. One paper got into PNS. Another was a current science paper that got a one full page coverage in science,
Right.
full page news coverage in science. Okay, so by publication standards also it was quite successful. I enjoyed it, and something new was done in the field.
Yeah.
Okay, entirely new subfield was opened. So all this is possible if you say that I want to work on my terms. And I I I know, or I believe, both know and believe, that there are still mentors who will give you substantial freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the field had changed, no doubt. I certainly feel a difference between 1990s and after 30 years. But there are still people who would encourage students to take freedom, okay, do something that you like, and watch them, and only interfere if you are going terribly wrong.
Right.
Otherwise, generally, it is a good thing at PhD level, people have maturity enough. So it's good thing to leave it to students to work out their path. They might go wrong, but they would realize, they would correct themselves. Right? And all this is the learning process.
Yes. So, but
Micro Micromanagement is perhaps is the worst option.
right,
Okay.
right.
But there is a reason why this happens. Okay, and this also happens through the structure of research. Right now, you have funding for a project that has to go in for 3 years. Let us say, typically 3 years. Right, in 3 years you have to achieve so and so objective. Right, so then you can't take chances. You can't say that, okay, a student will learn by making mistakes. No, that will take time. Although that is more thorough, but that will take time. So I want results in 6 months. Okay, so do this, do as I say, and give me results. Okay, that is a constraint of the system. Now, if on the other hand, if you are more laid back, committed, but more laid back, you can think, stop, think, make changes to your line of work, take your freedom, then it becomes a more thorough and more novel work. But then you may not be able to meet the deadline that is there.
Right, right. So then this constraint that we have, is this one of the major reasons why the philosophy quotient is missing in some sense from academia right now?
Yes, yeah. So essentially, the central idea of PhD and the way PhD is in reality is very different.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so PhD is a part of PhD has to be an epic work. Hmm. Needs to have a central question which is substantially novel, and you do very fundamental work in it. But look at what happens, and then science goes in an unexpected way. Research will often take an unexpected turn. Okay, you never know, right?
Yeah.
And most of the important things in science have happened serendipitously. People were trying to look for something and they found something entirely different. Okay, but look at what happens in PhD. You are expected to give a research plan and sort of stick to it. Okay, they will review after say 6 months, 2 years that are you following the path and so on.
Yeah.
In some universities, worse than that, in some universities, you have to give the title right away in the beginning,
Yeah.
right? And if you want to change the title, the committee needs to meet to approve your change title,
Yeah.
right? Whereas in research, anytime you find something unexpected, and you should have the freedom to decide that no, want to change my question itself because this is so interesting, this is more interesting than what I was originally asking, so I'm going to entirely take a different path. Researchers needs to have this freedom. This freedom is constrained by funding, right? Because your funding is to achieve so and so objective. You can't change the objective, right?
Yeah.
And secondly, your main workforce, if it is PhD, that was not the case with me. My main workforce was undergraduates. Okay, PhD was an offshoot of that. But if your main workforce is PhD, so PhD are also committed to certain objectives. Funding is also committed to certain objectives. So you just don't have the freedom to suddenly change your line of work.
Right. Right.
Then of course people are smart to do things, right? So they write funding for work that they have already done,
Right.
okay, and pretend that they haven't done it. Then they get funding and then they have the freedom to do something else,
Exactly.
right? All these are tricks, but these tricks are needed because the system is not well designed.
Right.
The system doesn't give you that freedom, so people have to outsmart the system to do better science.
Right. So
But
in your view, what is something that the current community of researchers can do to, because it's the researchers who are on various committees. It's the I mean, all the big funding agencies also have researchers on their supervisory committee. So it's
yes,
basically the same community of researchers who are funding, and the new people are joining in. So what as a community do you think needs to be done to, have this system in place, but also have a slight freedom where new basic research can take place?
Yeah. So the first thing is there needs to be many alternative models of doing science.
Hmm.
Okay. The perceived perception right now is there is only one path to doing the career, that you do a PhD, then you do postdocs, then you start applying, then some of them are filtered out of academics. Some stay in academics. If they get a faculty position here or there, then you look for tenure. Okay. So this is one path. I'm not saying that is wrong. Okay,
Right.
but this should be just one model. There should be alternative models of doing science which are equally respected.
Hmm.
Right? Now, alternative models are there. People have worked and are still working outside the main channel, outside the mainstream, but they don't have dignity.
Right. Right.
Okay, they
No,
don't
no.
have recognition, right?
Right.
And so first of all, we need to recognize alternative models of doing science, okay, and encourage alternative models of doing science. Young people should think seriously of adopting one of these models, whatever suits their nature, okay, and either get into industrial R&D or concept development, or get with common people and work, or get into teaching and use the undergraduate manpower and the young minds and put them to research.
Hmm.
So there can be so many alternative models, and we should explore these alternative models as well as try to bring them at par with the mainstream. Right now, when you have options, you can choose the one that suits your personality. The
Right.
mainstream is good for certain personalities, but it's not that only these personalities can do science. Others can do it. Others can perhaps do it better or in a different way. Okay, but so that should be encouraged. That is number one. Number two, what has happened today is a lot of importance is being given to the so-called the so many unscientific numbers. Okay, like how many publications, what impact factor, and so on. And as a result of this, people have actually stopped reading research.
Hmm.
Okay, they only look at which journal you publish. Nobody reads your research if you apply to some place.
Right.
Okay, actual evaluation in science it should be by reading the research. Nobody has time to read. Okay, so reading is a waste of time. What can be more ironical than this? But
Right.
people seem to evaluate your research, your science, just by looking at the number of publications. Now, because of this, so many kinds of misconduct has also started, and we are hearing more and more of it. Okay, so many papers retracted, right?
Yes.
Scientific misconduct cases happening in so many universities and institutions, right? Then there is a reproducibility crisis,
Right.
right? All this is because we are trying to evaluate science by something other than reading someone's science.
Right. Right.
In fact, there was a joke as well. So some university declared that now we will not consider impact factors.
Okay.
Okay, a true story. And the immediate reaction was, oh, then are you going to read everything?
Yeah, and so this actually this leads to my next topic or next question that I had in my mind, which is there is always this conundrum of choosing a path where you know it's a toxic work culture, but because it leads to a high impact career, you are always in that dilemma that okay, I know my work life balance will be kind of destroyed, but yet it's because of the high impact papers or patents that I will get from this 3 years, this 4 years, that will help my career in the future. And to an extent, as you said, that we are hardly reading research. I also have some information that in certain universities, it's the HR team that really
Hmm.
decodes numbers. It's not the scientists who are filtering out the applications. It's the HR
Yeah.
team who is just given a bunch of numbers and the journal names where you've published, and that's what filters your name up in the ladder. So,
Even scientists do the same thing. Okay, I have worked on so many committees, for example, choosing the fellows of academies and so on. Right now, this entire committee is constituted of scientists, right? But there are so many nominations, okay, and so much to read that it is impossible that the committee members read everything.
Right.
Then somehow they also go by numbers.
Yeah. But then, sir, how do we figure out this problem of uh, I mean, at the transition stage of you finished your PhD, you are looking for a job in academia. Right now, you said there are no parallel models of doing research. One should develop it. But this conundrum of choosing a high impact career versus losing your work life balance, what would be your guidance
Yeah.
for that?
I would say that there is no general answer to this question.
Right. Right.
It will depend on your own personality.
Mhm.
Okay, there are some people who are actually good at following the trend,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah.
if you are one of them, then do go by the trend. There is nothing wrong in following the trend,
Right.
right? So if you are made to do that high impact, take that high impact track and go by that, do it. It's welcome. But judge your own personality. Judge what suits you.
Right.
Okay. And this you will get by experience by observing others, right? And then you should choose what your mind decides. Okay. You should choose your path without bothering into what is called a more successful career, what gives you higher impact, and so on. No, I like this. I will take this path. I have a skill set in this particular area which very few others have. Okay, so then I will choose this. It should be guided by your own personality and your own strong points and weak points rather than saying that, okay, this is the successful track, so follow this.
Right. So, but when you're not being in that streamlined way of going for a career, isn't it a leap of faith that you're trying to do? Because
Isn't
uh,
it?
isn't it a leap of faith? Because you don't really know, like if you feel that you're not suited for a high impact career, there are really not many alternatives for doing the same thing in a different way.
No, I won't say there aren't alternatives. Okay, for example, university positions, teaching positions,
Hmm.
is in fact a good opportunity,
Okay.
right? They are not the high prestige positions in the field of research. They are not perceived as high prestige positions in the field of research, right?
Right.
Perhaps they give you less money and less time to do research, right?
Right.
But the plus side of it is you have so many young minds with you.
Hmm.
Okay, and they have much more enthusiasm. They are not working for PhDs. They are working out of their interest. Okay,
Right.
working is not a mandate for them. But
Mhm.
if they are interested, actually they end up working much better than PhD students. That is my experience. Because their interest drives them, okay, not their fellowship or not their uh, goal of PhD. Okay,
Right.
and if they do it for their passion, then they end up doing it much better. There
Right.
is another very important angle to this. See, for doing something out of the box, you need to take risk.
Right.
Okay, and at the level of PhD, not even students, even the mentors are not ready to take risk.
Right. Right.
Okay, this is because PhD is a big investment. See, you are in your 20s, in your prime, right?
Yeah.
5, 6, 7 years in your prime is a tremendous investment.
Right.
And then you can't end up saying, I failed after 5 years, right? And therefore, you have to choose something where you know it is going to work,
Yeah.
right? Which means you can't take risk. And if you can't take risk, you are most unlikely to come out with something entirely novel.
Right. Right.
Right? Now, that is the limitation of the PhD stream. On the other hand, our undergrad students often tried out so many crazy ideas Some of them failed, but they had nothing to lose if they failed. They were getting their degree anyway. Okay,
Right.
so, but if they succeed, then they come out with something because their idea is new, right? So they come out with something entirely novel and exciting. And that is because they can take risk. Okay, the PhD model doesn't have much of risk tolerance. So
Wow.
getting into Harvard or Stanford or Oxford of in India, IITs and ISERs is not the only thing for a career. Okay, get
Right.
into university, get into a college, right? Or get into an NGO that works for people. These are also good up. So let me give you one example. After quitting ISER, I had been working with farmers, okay, and
Mhm.
then we did a experimental game theory with farmers, okay, where farmers were our collaborators, not our subjects of research. Farmers were our collaborators. Many of them were completely illiterate, okay,
Mhm.
and then because I'm a teacher by nature, right? So then
Yeah.
in their language, I taught them game theory, right?
Okay.
They understood it by the intuitive sense. They cannot write equations,
Right.
right? But they understand the meaning of those equations, right?
Right.
So we did experimental game theory. Now that is now published and it got an international award as well.
Wow.
Okay, and I bet that this was not possible by being in a bureaucratic institute.
Right.
Right? Being out of it, I had the freedom to use the available funding. The funding was small because I was out of the institute. The funding available was very small, but I had the freedom to use the funding,
Right.
right, in a novel way, and therefore we could do an experiment that was not possible in an institute.
Yeah. True.
So diversify and choose the path that suits your mindset, okay, your personality. That should be the I would say that should what I would
Yeah.
advise.
Yeah. So you talked about funding right now, and on a global level, when we look at various funding opportunities, there's always a disparity uh, for funding in Asian countries, in India especially, versus what one can have in Europe or say in US. Now, although you can do a certain level of research with the available funding, it's always there are always these limitations with less amount of money available because you can't buy these expensive instruments. You can't really do high fund research. How do you see that affecting the quality of research that comes out from a given place versus from a place where you have more funding?
Yeah. So there are two things. There are two models of going about. One is that I want to do this, okay, such and such work. You're already committed to that.
Right.
For which I need such and such facility and such amount of funding, and how to get that. Okay,
Yeah.
is one way of thinking. Extremely valid, correct, and this is the mainstream.
Yeah.
The other way of thinking through which I had to go, maybe I may not have preferred that, but it
Mhm.
turned out to be a successful model, and that is look at what is available to you and think of what best you can do within these constraints.
Right.
Right? Obviously, there are obvious advantages of getting well funded, right?
Right.
But there are advantages of not getting funded, and that is that forces you to think of different ideas,
Hmm.
okay, which you may have failed to think if you were in the mainstream, right? If you had funding, you would have failed to look for alternatives. Now, I will give you one example. In the 1990s, people started talking about uncultivable bacteria,
Hmm.
and then the bacterial metagenomics idea came in. Okay, that was established by the mid 1990s, and then so many people took that path. Now we couldn't do that. At that time, I was in an undergrad college, right? But this was getting interesting. If there are so many uncultivable bacteria, what do we do with that? So then I said, let us ask a different question. Let us ask the question why they are uncultivable. If they grow in nature, then why don't they grow in my media? Right? So then we looked for alternative ways, and we could cultivate a substantial diversity that was not cultivated before.
Wow.
Okay, so if we had sequencing facility, then we would have followed what everyone was doing.
Right.
Okay, since we did not have facility, we had to think of an alternative question, and that alternative question actually worked.
Right.
So there are advantages of not getting funded.
It's
And
about the question that you really want to ask and how you adapt to what you have with you.
yes, and now after leaving for ISER, now it is 3.5 years, slightly more. I have published 17 papers, 5 are in review right now. Okay, this is without any institute, without any lab. What do I do? I realize that there is huge amount of data lying around in literature which has not been interpreted.
Mhm.
Okay, so just look at the data, ask new questions, try to interpret that, and you find something new.
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
so sitting at home, you can do something and publish good papers. Now my only limitation is I can't pay author charges.
Right.
Okay, so my journal choice gets limited. But
Right.
otherwise, I have published in quite reputed journals in the last 3 years.
Right. So that is another thing about academia, in terms of publishing, because
Yeah,
as you said, it's another market in a way where one has to pay money for publishing original research. And again, the funding disparity comes into picture because if you don't have funding, you really cannot approach a big journal like Nature or Science because they charge
right.
a lot.
And yeah, and then they will say that yo, you don't have publications in big journals, so no more funding.
Yeah,
That is a vicious cycle, right?
this type.
The only way to break through this cycle is to look for completely virgin ideas.
Mhm.
Okay, and that's what I have been doing.
Right.
If you look for virgin questions, unanswered questions, unasked questions, right,
Wow.
and unquestioned answers, both these
Mhm.
things are. There are so many unanswered questions, and there are so many unquestioned answers.
Right.
So you take up one of them, and if the question is new, even if you do a little bit, it is new to science.
Yeah.
Okay, so that becomes valuable.
Right. Right. That's a very interesting thought. One can look at when they're trying to transition into a complete new field. Uh, so you're a teacher by nature, and all your students thoroughly love the way you teach, and you're a friend to your students. But sadly, in academia, there is in some places at least there is this hierarchical structure. There is no feeling of being colleagues in a setup. You always have an undergrad, then you have a master, then you have a PhD, a postdoc, and then a faculty member at the end. What are your thoughts about this structure, and uh, do, what helps? Does this hierarchical structure has some benefits? We definitely know what are the problems with it, but does it even have some benefits to have this structure in place?
No, I would say this is a form of casteism or neo-Brahmanism.
Mhm.
Now, this hierarchy doesn't really make sense. Quite often, and this has happened so many times in the history of science, that novel solutions come from the lowest rank in the hierarchy.
Right.
Okay, and this has happened so many times in the history of science, right? So this hierarchy simply does not make sense.
Mhm.
I would respect a postdoc and a first year student equally.
Right.
Okay, maybe I would spend a little more time with first year students because they have more questions,
Right.
right? And very raw questions and often blunt questions. Remember, if you remember the story uh, of the naked emperor,
Mm-hmm.
right? Only a kid can see that the emperor is naked, right?
Yeah.
Experts just cannot see that, or they just cannot say that the emperor is naked. So
Right.
kids are extremely important for science. Ignorant person is the most important in science because an ignorant person asks the most fundamental question.
Right. Right.
Okay,
That's
so
a very interesting
first
way
we
of
have
putting.
to- yes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Uh, is there an internet glitch or something?
No, I can hear you.
Okay. Okay. I just see your video is freezing a bit. Um,
Huh.
okay. Now it's fine. Sir, so thank you very much for this wonderful, looking perspectives at looking at academia, teaching, and doing a PhD and everything. Before I let you go, I have one last important question, and which is also something that you are very fond of. Um, it relates to following your passion while doing your mainstream career. Uh, your mainstream career is science, but you have a passion for music. Uh, uh, it so happens that in trying to go behind your career, you let go uh, the things that you like anything like maybe sports, maybe art, maybe other things. How is your experience with doing your mainstream career but having this passion with you, and how does this gel into you becoming a better person and better researcher?
Yeah, uh, music and poetry has helped me relieving I won't call it stress or tension, but the monotony. Okay, if you are following one path, then it becomes monotonous, and you need something to relieve you from that monotony. Right?
Right.
So many things. Music, poetry, reading has helped me do that. Not only that, interestingly, music has helped me in making contacts in the field of science. Okay,
Wow.
I'll give. I will tell you a story. About 7, 8 years ago, I think it was 2014, some November or December 2014. I got an email from a Nobel laureate,
Okay.
Martin Chalfie. Okay, the 2008 Nobel laureate, the person who is known for the green fluorescent protein and
Okay. Yeah.
use and so on. I got an email from him, and he invited me for to give a set 2 3 talks, one panel discussion in New York, okay, in University of Columbia. So I asked them, how do you know me? Okay, so we happened to be in a meeting, and I gave a talk. He was in the audience. Then he gave a talk. I was, so only that much. Then he said that this particular panel discussion is about creativity, and I want someone who has worked in science and some form of art.
Wow.
Okay, and that's why I invited you. Hmm? And that led me to making so many contacts and friends in the circle around. See,
Right.
I am completely Indian. I never did any postdoc abroad. I didn't do PhD abroad, right? Ultimately, very recently, I started going to meetings and meeting people in US and Europe and China also. And that is only last 10, 15 years history. Okay.
Right.
But so my first exposure was through such meeting.
Wow.
And I was invited by him particularly because I also do and I also compose music.
That's interesting. It's very interesting. Great. Wonderful, sir. So thank you so much for being with us today on this final episode of this season. And I'm very sure all of the viewers who have listened to this talk and the people who couldn't follow today will listen to it later. They will find a new way of looking at science, at PhD, and why to choose certain things over others. And I'm very sure it will help a lot of us going further. So thank you once again for taking out the time to be on our
Yeah.
show.
And I enjoyed being with you. I hope all our audience would have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Yeah, sir, you'll just have to close it from your end.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was Professor Milind Watve with his very novel ideas about how to do science, how to encounter problems, a very different perspective. I hope all of you guys will take something from this and apply it in some way in your careers. This brings us to the end of what has been a very, very wonderful season for us at our end. I hope it has been a good season at your end as well, listening to different people, to their stories across fields, across countries, across domains. Uh, we thoroughly thank all our guests who have come on this season, and we hope we are back with season 4 soon with new zest and zeal. Till then, do take good care of yourself. And this is Amogh signing off with season 3 of PhD, the philosophical drama. Take care.